told us it wouldn't work. They said Burkina Faso was too unstable, too fragile, too isolated. They said a military captain with nationalist rhetoric, mine takeovers, and an anti-Western posture would scare investors, collapse the economy, and send the country into financial freefall. But today, Burkina Faso has done something that few predicted. The country has flipped its current account into surplus. Gold production just hit record highs. And the International Monetary Fund, that same IMF that many assumed would distance itself, just unlocked fresh funding, acknowledging that the reforms under Captain Ibrahim Traoré have strengthened Burkina Faso's economic position. Let that sink in. The same institutions that were supposed to punish resource sovereignty are now signaling confidence. So the question we must ask is this: did Traoré just demonstrate that Africa's resource sovereignty strategy can actually work, if it's disciplined, strategic, and backed by results? Because if this model holds, if a conflict-stricken Sahel nation can leverage its natural resources, flip its external balance, and negotiate from strength, then this isn't just about Burkina Faso. It could mark the beginning of a very different economic playbook for the continent. Let's break it down. Let's start with the facts. Last week, the IMF completed its latest review of Burkina Faso's economic program and approved a fresh disbursement of approximately $33.2 million. This brings total support under the extended credit facility arrangement to $165.8 million since September 2023. But that's not all. The IMF also approved a new resilience and sustainability facility worth $124.3 million, running through September 2027. This facility is designed to strengthen climate adaptation for the 80% of Burkina Faso's population dependent on subsistence farming. Now, here's the headline that matters most. Burkina Faso's current account has moved into surplus. For those unfamiliar, the current account measures whether a country is earning more from exports than it's spending on imports and external obligations. For years, Burkina Faso, like many African economies, ran deficits, more money leaving than entering. But now, thanks to record gold production and high global prices, export revenues have surged. The IMF projects the current account will shift from a deficit of 3.4% of GDP in 2024 to surpluses of 1.1% in 2025 and 0.8% in 2026. That is not cosmetic. That is structural. Gold output in Burkina Faso reached approximately 94 tons in 2025, a historic high. This includes industrial production, artisanal mining, and state seizures. The increase of more than 30 tons compared with 2024 marks one of the strongest annual performances in the country's extractive history. Mining Minister Yakuba Zabre Guba, presenting his ministry's 2025 performance report to the Prime Minister, reported an 89.66% achievement rate under the ministry's performance contract. He attributed the gains largely to mining sector reforms anchored in economic sovereignty. About 42 tons of gold came from artisanal mining activities alone. The government credited the surge to the operationalization of the state-owned Burkina Faso Mining Participation Company, SOPAMIB, as well as tighter oversight of the country's 15 industrial mines. Government efforts to clamp down on illegal gold trading also yielded results, with authorities recovering about 10 kilograms of gold from illicit supply chains during the year. Gold prices have certainly helped. According to ECOFIN agency data, gold prices rose from $2,387 per ounce in 2024 to $3,218 in 2025, with projections reaching $3,472 in 2026. Combined with mining sector reforms and increased artisanal production, exports grew by an extraordinary 43.2% in 2025. Now, here's where the narrative gets interesting. Was this simply a global gold windfall? Or did policy decisions inside Burkina Faso help turn high prices into real national gain? Because let's be clear, plenty of African countries experience commodity booms but fail to convert them into macro stability. The key variable is not price alone, it's capture. Who captures the value? Under Traoré's leadership, several things changed in Burkina Faso's mining sector. First, the government tightened oversight over gold production and exports, especially artisanal mining, which historically has been vulnerable to smuggling and underreporting. Second, the state expanded its role in mining operations through national structures designed to increase domestic participation. Third, they reassessed foreign-controlled assets and increased state leverage in strategic mines. Critics call this resource nationalism. But here's a strategic lens. If a country improves monitoring, reduces leakage, strengthens tax collection, and increases formal export channels, then high prices don't just benefit private sectors, they strengthen the state balance sheet. And that appears to be exactly what's happening in Burkina Faso. The IMF didn't approve new funding because gold prices were high. They approved it because the macro indicators improved under the program. According to the IMF's official statement, Burkina Faso's economy has shown notable strength and resilience amid security and humanitarian challenges. The fund noted that sound economic policies to improve governance and domestic revenue mobilization have contributed to creating fiscal space and supporting recovery, while keeping inflation under control and public debt on a sustainable path. Program performance was assessed as satisfactory. The authorities met all end June 2025 quantitative performance criteria and achieved 8 of 10 structural benchmarks. On governance, Burkina Faso has completed 6 of the 11 priority recommendations from the IMF's Governance Diagnostic Assessment, including measures to strengthen the integrity of mining license procedures. The fiscal consolidation is equally impressive. The budget deficit narrowed from 5.8% of GDP in 2024 to 3.5% in 2025, a 2.3 percentage point tightening in a single year. Total public debt is projected to decline from 57.2% of GDP in 2024 to 52.1% in 2025, and to fall below 50% by 2029. Nominal GDP per capita rose from $982 in 2024 to an estimated $1,127 in 2025, with projections of $1,250 in 2026 and $1,427 by 2029. Beyond the macro numbers, the newly approved $124.3 million Resilience and Sustainability Facility targets a fundamental vulnerability: climate shocks. With roughly 80% of the population dependent on subsistence farming, Burkina Faso is one of the world's most climate-vulnerable nations. The funding will support agricultural adaptation measures, improve disaster risk financing, and reduce the country's periodic reliance on emergency food imports. The RSF focuses on 4 pillars: strengthening fiscal resilience by institutionalizing disaster risk finance, anchoring climate resilience in public infrastructure investment, advancing sustainable clean energy and water provision, and attracting climate finance by improving disclosure of climate investments. This matters because it addresses the structural fragility beneath the commodity boom. If Burkina Faso can build climate resilience while leveraging its mineral wealth, the combination could be transformative. But here's where we must step back and look at the bigger picture. Mining Minister Guba, presenting the 2025 achievements, also highlighted progress beyond gold. Nearly 160,000 households were newly connected to the national electricity grid in 2025, while 131 rural localities gained access to power. The government deployed more than 165 kilometers of transmission lines and roughly 500 kilometers of low-voltage lines to strengthen electricity distribution nationwide. Looking ahead to 2026, the government plans to deepen reforms, including restructuring the Bureau of Mines and Geology and reorganizing artisanal mining into formal cooperatives. Authorities are targeting at least 10 semi-mechanized mining projects, all led entirely by local private investors. In 2026, we will work to firmly entrench energy and mining sovereignty, Guba said. There's a historical parallel worth considering. In 1997, Indonesia was in crisis. The Asian financial crisis hit. The currency collapsed. Capital fled. By 1998, Indonesia was forced into a massive IMF bailout. The global narrative was familiar. Indonesia is unstable. Indonesia is corrupt. Indonesia cannot manage its economy without external supervision. But instead of rejecting the IMF outright, Indonesia restructured its economy from within. It stabilized inflation, strengthened fiscal management, improved tax administration, and, critically, leveraged its natural resources strategically. Over time, Indonesia moved from raw export dependence toward greater domestic processing. Most recently, Indonesia banned the export of raw nickel ore to force foreign companies to invest in domestic smelting and processing. Critics said it would scare investors. Instead, Indonesia became a global hub for nickel processing. Today, it is Southeast Asia's largest economy, a G20 member with strong foreign reserves. Burkina Faso today faces similar skepticism. Political transition, security challenges, resource dependence, the profile fits. And like Indonesia, Burkina Faso is attempting something unusual, tightening state control over resources while remaining engaged with global institutions. The IMF didn't reject this approach, it just approved more funding. But we must be intellectually honest. This model is fragile, gold is volatile, security costs remain enormous, political transitions are unpredictable, and if gold prices fall sharply, the surplus could disappear quickly. The IMF projects economic growth of about 5% in 2026, but this outlook remains closely tied to improvements in the domestic security situation. The government has pledged to continue fiscal consolidation, targeting a budget deficit ceiling of 3.5% of GDP, while safeguarding spending on health and social protection. Balancing reform momentum with social and security demands will be closely watched. So the real question isn't whether Burkina Faso won this round. The real question is whether this model can survive a downturn. If this strategy survives even one full commodity cycle, if Burkina Faso maintains improved revenue capture even when prices normalize, then this stops being luck and becomes precedent. And precedent changes bargaining power. Because once one country demonstrates that resource assertion does not automatically equal economic collapse, that IMF engagement does not require total policy surrender, and that sovereignty can coexist with macro discipline, then the psychological barrier breaks. The real transformation is not the $33 million IMF disbursement. That amount is symbolic. The real transformation is leverage. Burkina Faso today is negotiating from a position of stronger numbers than many predicted 2 years ago. And in global finance, numbers are power. For decades, African countries have been told that stability comes first and sovereignty comes later. That you must open first, liberalize first, privatize first, and then growth will follow. But Burkina Faso just demonstrated something different. It tightened control over its most strategic export. It improved revenue capture, it strengthened its external balance, and it stayed within the IMF system. That combination is unusual because historically, the narrative has been framed as a choice. You either align with global institutions or you assert nationalistic economic control. Burkina Faso is attempting to do both. Indonesia proved that disciplined policy over time can transform a crisis country into a regional powerhouse. Botswana proved that resource control doesn't have to mean economic chaos. Norway proved that sovereignty and global engagement can coexist. So the bigger question for Africa is this: is the continent ready to operate at scale with this kind of discipline? Because resource sovereignty is easy to shout, but very hard to execute. It requires strong tax systems, real oversight, reduced leakage, saving during boom years, political restraint, and long-term planning beyond election cycles. It requires leaders who think in decades, not headlines. We know Africa does not lack resources. It does not lack global demand, and it certainly does not lack geopolitical relevance. What Africa has historically lacked is sustained, disciplined execution across cycles. If Burkina Faso can maintain this strategy through a downturn, if it can build reserves, institutionalize reforms beyond one leader, and move toward value addition instead of raw export dependence, then this stops being a story about one Sahel country. It becomes a blueprint. And that blueprint would say something powerful. You don't have to choose between sovereignty and stability. You don't have to choose between the IMF and national interest. You can strengthen your numbers and then negotiate from strength, but only if discipline matches ambition. Burkina Faso did not become wealthy overnight. It did not suddenly solve insecurity. It did not eliminate structural risk. It did not escape the global financial system. What it did, what it is doing, is leveraging a moment. High gold prices have met tighter oversight. Resource control has met macro discipline. Nationalist rhetoric has met IMF benchmarks. And the result? A surplus, record output, fresh funding, improved leverage. Is that permanent? We don't know yet. The true test of any resource strategy is not what happens during a boom, it's what survives after the boom. But for now, Burkina Faso has flipped the script. It has shown that a country facing insurgency, political transition, and Western skepticism can still strengthen its economic position if it plays the game with discipline. The Traoré effect is real. The question now is whether it can last, and whether the rest of Africa is watching.